Welcome to the Screenplay Lab. I'm Jeff Barker. I'm your host. I'm a screenwriter. And this is a podcast where we study and appreciate the standalone beauty of the screenplay as an independent literary piece, not just a blueprint for the film. We take one screenplay, we break it down, deconstruct it, we find out what we love about it, what's unique, and most importantly, what we can learn from it. This is our 13th episode, and this week our screenplay is The Lighthouse by Robert and Max Eggers. This is a 2019 contained world, claustrophobic, psychological thriller that's also a horror. It's about two 19th century lighthouse keepers. It's an uncomfortable read. It's an intriguing film. And if you're a screenplay nerd like I am, you already know this one has a lot we can learn from.
Bellow! Bid our father, the Sea King, rise from the depths full, foul in his fury, black waves teeming with salt foam, to smother this young mouth with pungent slime, to choke ye.
And as you can see, it is a beautiful film, and it was nominated for an Academy Award for Best Cinematography in 2019. It lost to the movie 1917, and you know about that one with that long one, or I think they had 3 cuts in the whole film. William Dafoe won Best Supporting Actor at the Independent Spirit Awards, and Eggers and Robert Pattinson were nominated for various awards throughout the award circuit. It was a big deal when it came out, but possibly it's grown in popularity even more since then, given the rocket ship trajectory of Robert Eggers and all of his upcoming projects. So let's talk about the writers of this screenplay. There are two. It's Robert Eggers and his brother, Max. Let's start with Max. He's one of the 3 Eggers brothers. He's actually the twin to Sam, the other filmmaker, and Robert is their half-brother. His first foray into film was as a production assistant on his brother Robert's short film in 2008, A Telltale Heart. Then 10 years later, he co-wrote this screenplay with his brother Robert, and this was his first writing credit. Then in 2024, he co-wrote and co-directed a film called The Front Room with his other brother, Sam. It's a psychological thriller about a pregnant couple and a wicked stepmother. And rumors are that he might possibly be involved with one of Robert's next upcoming projects, but we don't know. They all grew up in New Hampshire. Their father was a Shakespearean professor, and their mother was an actor in a local theater and also ran a theater company. So they grew up among the arts, and look at them now, the 3 of them, making films. And Robert Eggers, also co-writing this screenplay and directing it, he's become a genre all by himself. I mean, he is an icon at this point. We learned a lot about him when we broke down Nosferatu. That's on a previous episode. You should check it out. And he was deep into the theater, given his mom. And he went to college for theater design, and also costume design. And you could see that in all of his screenplays and all of his films. He worked in the New York theater scene. He did classical theater. He did the experimental theater. He did a lot of short films and sort of edged himself into the film world. And then 2015, The Witch, this low budget horror, just crushed it at the box office. And then it was time for him to start making more movies. The Lighthouse, our screenplay today, is his second film in 2019, like we said. And then 3 years later, he co-wrote and directed The Northman. He did that with an Icelandic poet, co-wrote that one. And then on Christmas Day, 2024, Nosferatu came out. And now we know we're getting another Christmas present. But not this year, boys and girls. You'll have to wait. 2026, Christmas Day, Werewolf. What we know about it is that it's set in the 13th century, so 1200s, England, and it's being described as his darkest script yet. That's hard to believe. Also, he signed on to possibly remake Pan's Labyrinth, which people are really excited about. He's married to a psychologist, that probably helps, and he lives in Brooklyn, has a kid. So how was this screenplay developed? I get the story by piecing together interviews that I found online, and it's a really fascinating story. First of all, Robert was always interested in Edgar Allan Poe's unfinished short story called The Lighthouse. And so he passed this idea on to Max and said, hey, I'm really busy. I want to do this project with you. You get started on it, right? So Max goes to work, writes a whole screenplay, gives it to his brother, and his brother doesn't love it. And here's the funny part about it is that Robert Eggers thought the screenplay was too weird, too surreal, too literal. So he came on board and took a go at it. He added his trademark psychological horror aspect, the climate, the style that we're used to, and then gave it back to Max, and they both determined it went too far the other way. So they decided to sit down side by side, bang this thing out, and they broke the story, and it's a good one. They found the middle ground here between this allegory abstract and the gritty, grounded horror, and it works. One of the things you get here is this unique dialect, and this is something that is very in particular about Robert Eggers' screenplays, is he creates a sound for his characters by studying how they may have possibly sounded. Because remember, we don't have audio recordings of all of these period piece screenplays that he's written. Interesting though, Max here, his one time as a director, that he did a modern setting. So, but together here, they're taking us to 1890, and they're doing some studying. They're studying journals, literature, newspapers, sailor logs, understanding how the language is written, and then trying to figure out how it might sound. Principal photography started in April 2018 on a remote peninsula in Nova Scotia, and they built the lighthouse and the surrounding structures from scratch. There was nothing there but a big rock. And they shot it for 34 miserable, damp, cold, muddy days. They were isolated. The stories that the crew and the cast tell are just horrific. There was even problems with the equipment. And the two actors, Defoe and Pattinson, say that it was the most difficult shoots of their lives. Both of them say that independently. And they didn't even talk to each other very much, if at all, on set. They stayed in character, stayed away from each other so that their energy would be raw when they spoke to each other. It wasn't until after they wrapped that they started talking about their experiences and how they were both so miserable. It was produced on an $11 million budget and premiered at Cannes in May of 2019 and was released worldwide in October. And it made $18 million at the box office, so it did make its money back and then some. And it was produced and distributed by A24, everyone's fan favorite. Regency was also involved as a financer and a producer. Here, the interesting thing is that Regency, they do movies like Fight Club, The Revenant. They rarely do these indie-style horrors, and that tells you about the power of Robert Eggers. All right, here we go, breaking down the screenplay, and we start with the log line, and here is the official log line of The Lighthouse. A hypnotic and hallucinatory tale of two lighthouse keepers on a remote and mysterious New England island in the 1890s. Here's my go at it. Trapped on a remote island, two 19th century lighthouse keepers descend into madness as isolation and suspicion begin to blur the lines of reality. Screenplay statistics, it's 98 pages, 114 scenes. The runtime of the film is 1 hour and 49 minutes. That comes to 1 minute and 7 seconds per page and 1.2 scenes per page. Now we move to formatting, mechanics, and style, and this is where we study the actual document itself and how the screenwriters teach us to read their individual screenplays. This one has a lot of unique and interesting elements, a lot of similar things we saw in Nosferatu, though. The first is this really cool player's introduction. It's an insert here, page II. And look at this. I love this. I wish this were standard. I wish I had the courage to put it in my screenplays. It tells you straight up who the players are, the setting, gives you some notes about the screenplay, the film. This is a carryover from his days, obviously, in theater, because this is common in, when you see theater plays. But you see here, it introduces our players, says it's set far off the coast of Maine around 1890. The film will be photographed on black and white 35 millimeter negative. Aspect ratio 1.19 to 1. That's almost square. And mono, the audio. Okay. Maybe could have left that one out, but he's being very, very specific. Another thing I want to show you is in that earlier drafts of the screenplay, not the final draft, but earlier, there was drawings in here of what the lighthouse would look like. There was no just creating it with words like here it is. Probably because we had to build this thing on this rock in the middle of nowhere. Can you imagine the carpenters? We're talking about the cast and crew and how miserable they were. What about before they got there, these carpenters? My goodness. The next thing to point out is the characters themselves, and they are named old and young throughout the entire screenplay, even though at times they do give their names. Although the question is, are those their real names? So much of this screenplay is left up to the imagination for you as the reader and the viewer to figure out or decide. They use all caps a lot. And remember, he did the same thing in Nosferatu. Names are capitalized, all caps, not just the first time they show up, but every single time in the screenplay. Props are capitalized, not just significant props, but all props, and every time they show up in the screenplay. Character movements show up, all caps. Important moments, all caps. So when you do all that, you start to see that if you take the dialogue out and just look at the action lines, it's more all caps than not. We get the Eggers signature slug line where he uses the dot, the period, rather than the dash. No big deal. He's consistent with it. This is the same thing we see in all his screenplays. They designate dialogue beats in the screenplay by spacing down. So there's nothing there. It's just a space. I'll show you what I'm talking about. Here's an example on 64 where they do it the more traditional way. And this is the only time in the whole screenplay that it's like this. You see where old has a line, then there's a beat, and he has a line, there's a beat, and a line, and a beat. This is what you would obviously most commonly see. I'm not sure why they did this here, because again, it's the only time that it's like that in the whole screenplay. But here's how they do it for the rest of the screenplay. It's very unique. Let's look at 89 to get a good example. Old is talking here at the top of the page. He says, "Boo, boo, where are you to do?" And then they're indicating here there's a pause, there's a beat. They just skip down to the next line. Look at ye, look at ye. Pause, so they skip down to the next line. Will ye kill me, will ye? And then there's blank line, then the final line of the dialogue. It really spaces things out. And you know how I'm always saying that the screenwriters teach us how to read their individual screenplays? Here's another example of this. Earlier, when they first start doing this, they show us a pause, even though it's not put in as a parenthetical. So here, let's look at 64, where Young's talking. He says, "Didn't want to wake you," is all. He spaces down, and then they put in pause, but it's not in the dialogue box. It's out there. It's its own action line. But then it doesn't come back with a character heading. It goes right back into the dialogue. Long night, pause, and such. This is one, if you're listening to the audio podcast, you really have to kind of see it, because I don't think I'm doing a great job explaining it. But if you see it, you can clearly see what I'm talking about. This does a couple of things. One of the things it does is it creates more white space on the page, and the white space in the screenplay is beautiful. Another thing that it does is, as a reader, it keeps you moving. Sometimes when we have parentheticals just breaking up dialogue, especially if it's a long blocks of dialogue and there are multiple parentheticals in there, it really slows you down, really kind of takes you out of the moment. This way, your eyes just keep going, and you start to realize that that space means the characters are taking a breath, they're pausing. It keeps you going through the story vertically down the page rather than horizontally. But the white space in the screenplay, like I said, magnificent. There's so many great examples of it. In the beginning, there are some pretty large chunks of action lines when they're describing things, setting the scene. But once they get into the story, a lot of white space. Not only because of this skipping down, but two other reasons. One, because of sometimes when a character has nothing to say, they use the technique of the dash dash as a piece of dialogue. That gives us a lot more white space. Plus the formatting of the screenplay. They use the full page layout with the 1.5 inches on the left and the inch on the right and the inch on top and the bottom. Starting to see a lot of these modern screenplays don't do that. They cheat a little bit, take a little off the edges so you can get more words on there. Not here. It gives us a lot of white. Also, they use the 2 line skips before each scene heading. That spaces things out. All right. Thanks for watching. And if you're enjoying this, I'm so very grateful. Again, my name is Jeff Barker. You can keep up with what I'm doing at my website, jeff-barker.com. Please don't forget to like and subscribe and leave a comment, all that stuff. Share me with your friends, please, your screenwriting friends, your filmmaking friends. I try to update on all the socials. Remember that this is available as a video and an audio podcast. I also do a written Substack that breaks down this screenplay and all the other ones. So I'd love to see you on the other side. Let's be friends. Now back to the program.
Thank you for watching my dad's podcast.
And now to the direction on the page, where we read these screenplays and see if the screenwriters decide to use direction on the page or not. And then you can decide what you want to do about it in your screenplay. One of these screenwriters is the director of this film, so it is something to keep in mind. Although in my experience studying all these screenplays so deeply, that doesn't really matter. Some directors don't want to put a lot of direction in their screenplay. Some do. So you'll have to debate that amongst yourselves. But let's look at the facts. The facts are they do it quite a bit in this screenplay. Now, the classic we see, we are, we hear, we follow, none of that. In fact, I've never seen that, I don't think, from Robert Eggers. I know he didn't do it in Nosferatu. We do get specific camera directions, though, 74 times in the screenplay. The camera or angles are mentioned. The camera specifically talks about pushing and pulling and booming. They have some beautiful descriptions of boom shots, which do show up in the screen, in the film. Follows, dollies, all of that stuff. Also, angles, 59 times angles are mentioned. You have wide angles talked about 9 times, close angles 13 times. Also, images. He talks about having a specific image on the frame. Now, none of those 15 frames per second images like in Nosferatu, but we do see that a lot. And then the signature hold. This is something that Robert Eggers in particular loves to put in his screenplays. If there's a shot that he wants to hang out for a while and let us as a reader know that this is important, this is significant, he puts hold. He did it, and his brother together, they did it 15 times in this screenplay. We also get point of view, focus 3 times, and then angle on, meaning there's some multiple things in this shot, but we want to focus in on 5 times. That is mentioned in the screenplay. So there you have it. Now for the actual writing of the screenplay, and for a story with only 2 characters, there's really not that much dialogue. And I think that's another reason why it's sort of spaced out so much, because this 98-page screenplay, even with everything in it, could have easily been an 85-page screenplay. Not that that matters, I don't guess, but it definitely is spaced out. And then the beginning in particular, no dialogue. We don't have any dialogue at all until page 4, and that is just Young saying, son of a, because he hit his head. So it's not even a full sentence. Then it goes on for another 2 pages. It is until page 6 that we get true actual dialogue. There aren't a lot of screenplays that open up for 6 pages without dialogue, but that is what we have here. When they do speak, often there are some pretty long monologues. In fact, the 2 most famous scenes in the film come from these gigantic monologues. The first is on page 61 that we want to look at, and this is old, and he's cursing Young with this old ancient sea spell, and it brings to mind some questions. One is, does he really believe that he can do it, but he can't? Does he know that he can't do it and he's just messing with Young? Or did he actually do it? So it has to be one of those 3 things. And there are many times in the screenplay where it's all left up to interpretation. But if you fall into one category that you think this screenplay or this film is one thing, there's evidence to prove you right. If you believe it's something else along the way, there's evidence to prove you right. Anyway, this is a really cool monologue. Here it is in the movie.
Hark! Hark! Triton! Hark! Hello! Bid our father, the Sea King, rise from the depths full foul in his fury, black waves teeming with salt foam, to smother this young mouth with pungent slime. To choke ye, engorging your organs till ye turn blue and bloated with bilge and brine and can scream no more. Only when he, crowned in cockle shells, with slithering tentacled tail and steaming beard, take up his fell befinned arm. His coral-tined trident screeches banshee-like in the tempest and plunges right through your gullet.
Raise your hand if you love Will Dafoe. You should probably get him in your film. Problem is he's always busy doing Robert Eggers films. He doesn't have much time for anything else. But What a talent. Also here, Robert Pattinson, he doesn't want to be outdone. He has a really interesting and fun monologue. Here it is in the film.
You think you're so goddamn high and mighty just because you're a goddamn lighthouse keeper? Well, you ain't a captain of no ship, and you never was. You ain't no general. You ain't no copper. You ain't the president, and you ain't my father. And I'm sick of you acting like you is. Sick of you laughing, snoring, and you goddamn farts. You goddamn farts!
And Hello Darkness, my old friend. If it's a Robert Eggers screenplay or film, it's going to have darkness in it. It's his trademark. Not only is it in the way the film is shot through his wonderful cinematographer, but also on the page. I mean, it is intentional. In fact, in Nosferatu, I believe it's 120 or 130 times he mentions shadow, darkness. That's the whole point, is we want to hide our monster. In fact, I have a whole video on hiding your monster about Robert Eggers. You should check it out. And here they do it 26 times in the screenplay, where they very specifically mention darkness, shadows, black. And it's much harder to do in this film because of the aspect ratio. There's not a lot of places to hide. In fact, shooting in this type of film takes a ton of light. Like, to be able to see in black and white the detail that you see, you have to really blow up the space with light. So to do that, but also edit it in such a way where you have darkness, and there's a lot of darkness on the finished product here. It's a little tricky, but again, this is the signature Eggers, where we have darkness in the screenplay. I love it. I love to see it. I also want to point out how they create art on the page with words. And you're like, well, obviously that's what creative writing is, right? I mean specifically with the words themselves. They do it several times, several different ways. Here on 58, we get a glimpse of an entire page with nothing but what's. Have you ever seen this before in a screenplay? The entire page is just what's over and over again. And this does show up in the film to some extent, where they're just yelling what at each other, but it is really cool to see here in the screenplay. And on 62, they really make us feel the lightning. And the reason why I consider this art on the page is because of how the page is laid out. We have a description, then the lightning. Description, lightning. And so it is really like jolting as we read down the screenplay. They also speak to us, the readers, as an aside, in parentheses. This is not terribly uncommon in screenplays. It happens. But interesting thing here is how they do it. You can see on 68, Old begins diddling 10-penny bit and dancing a jig, and then it tells us a definition. It says diddling is a kind of maritime scat singing that mimics a fiddle. They obviously found this in all their extensive research. Some people would have maybe written this as an aside, but they would have put the parentheses right after the diddling at the top of the paragraph. They pull it down here, and then it becomes more like a definition. We get it again in the screenplay, where it's more of just sort of like showing their voice. Here on page 14, it says he pushes the wheelbarrow down the rock, and then parentheses, needless to say, the wheel squeaks. So there's 100 ways to write that, but they chose to do it this way to sort of include us in the story. A little wink, wink, a little joke. Of course, the wheel squeaking. Everything's going wrong. Another great example of how they use the space on the page is when they describe laughing. There's a lot of laughter in the screenplay toward the final act, when they start drinking more and things start getting weird between them, or weirder. You can see on 81, 82, we've got this laughing. It takes us down the page till we get to the end of the block there, and it says hold. There's that signature Eggers hold, and then black. Also very important for Robert and Max Eggers. And if you want to take a look at cinematic writing, there's quite a bit in this screenplay. It's not consistent throughout, but there are some beautiful bursts in here where they're using the art of describing a scene without using camera angles and all that. Let's look at this one here on page 38. This is about the weather. When the weather turns, either because it just did or because young was cursed by old. These, again, you can decide. It makes sense either way. But it says, suddenly the wind gusts and the arrow starts to jiggle a bit. The wind picks up. The arrow spins around and around and around, and it settles, jiggling slightly in the wind. And then the arrow points hard east. So it's telling us that the wind changed. That takes up a lot of real estate on the page. Could have said that in half a line, but they're showing it to us cinematically, helping us have this movie in our head as a reader. I appreciate it. Quick bit here about the symbolism, and I know there's probably been a lot of talk about symbolism from the film. I'll look at it from the screenplay perspective. The lighthouse, of course, is symbolism. Obviously, Prometheus stealing light from the gods. Young wants the light, but he can't have it, and then he's punished for it. The light could represent enlightenment that is so powerful that it leads to madness. I mean, that's one of the themes of this screenplay, is knowing too much about yourself, that you have to face the demons in the corners of yourself that have been walled off, that you've been protecting this whole time. Identity, old and young most likely represent two halves of the same identity. In fact, when I was first reading the screenplay, and I hadn't seen this film, I'd missed it. I'd been meaning to watch it for years. When I first started reading the screenplay, I was convinced that this was just the same person. Maybe they were dead, purgatory, or one was about to die and the younger person came back to visit them. I just knew, and obviously that's the easy route, and why would they do that? They wouldn't do that. But that's how I was reading the screenplay, under the assumption that old and young were the same person. I'm guessing that's exactly how they wanted the viewer to watch this film and experience it, thinking suspiciously the whole time, this is the same person. If you're thinking that and you're looking at everything through that lens, it distracts you as a reader and a viewer from what's really going on. It's sort of like sleight of hand. But we can safely say that old and young represent the past and the future, the id and the ego, and they fight and then they're affectionate with each other. It's so weird, and it makes you feel uncomfortable, and you just like, oh no, something bad's going to happen. The sea is a part of symbolism. It conspires against them. It isolates them. It represents chaos and fate and power, things that you can't control, which is pretty much life. That angry, evil seagull represents probably young having to face his own issues, and when he destroys the seagull is the tipping point. It's the second act split when he starts to fall into madness. Maybe he didn't. And the mermaid and the tentacle, and I had to think hard about this one. Obviously, the mermaid represents desire, but I think more importantly, it represents the desire to escape the island, yes, but also to escape yourself, to escape the guilt of the things that you did and how you're tormenting yourself. Maybe rightfully so, but that's the escape. And the tentacle represents entanglement and entrapment, and you're not going anywhere. And here is how the words look on the screen. And that is The Lighthouse by Robert and Max Eggers. And the literary document here that the Eggers brothers put together is its own piece of madness. It descends into the madness of skipped lines and missing parentheticals and pages of one word repeated over and over again, sentences of laughter. It's its own madness. And they accomplished the goal of giving us something with the flavor of Poe, but with the signature Eggers historical texture and altered language. This screenplay is a sea shanty folklore. It's a psychosexual power play. And it is certainly a mermaid movie that I won't be telling my daughter about. And that is all for this episode of the Screenplay Lab. Thank you so much for being here, and I'll see you next time. Please don't forget to like and subscribe and leave a comment, all that stuff. Share me with your friends, please, your screenwriting friends, your filmmaking friends. I try to update on all the socials. Remember that this is available as a video and an audio podcast. I also do a written Substack that breaks down this screenplay and all the other ones. So I'd love to see you on the other side.
Thank you for watching my dad's podcast.